He's just a dowry to me, the Alpha said, unaware she was listening. Stay with me. This one is going to hurt a little. And then it's going to feel like justice. Chapter 1. The girl who gave freely the hearth fire had been burning since sundown, deep inside Casimir Ironvale's victory hall. The great doors of black cedar and hammered iron were drawn shut against the mountain cold. Not fully, though. Never quite fully in a room full of drinking men who believe themselves unwatched. A thin blade of amber firelight bled beneath them and spread across the stone corridor floor like a secret that had already half escaped. And through that same narrow gap, voices. Low voices, the kind men use when they believe the night itself is keeping their confidence. Seraphel Ashvane was 3 steps from that door. She was not supposed to be here, standing alone in a cold corridor at this hour. She was supposed to be in her chambers, resting, performing the particular brand of graceful, unobtrusive stillness that the Iron Veil Dominion expected of its Alpha's newly bonded mate. She was supposed to be content, quiet, present without being inconvenient, but love, real love, the kind that moves before it thinks, the kind that carries things across cold stone corridors in the dark, does not consult the schedule of kingdoms. She was carrying a small obsidian vessel, warm against her palms, sealed with a corkstopper wound in silver thread. Inside it, a healer's blend she'd spent the better part of the evening preparing with her own 2 hands, moonwhite root ground to fine powder, frost moss soaked in glacial water she had filtered herself by candlelight, cold sage pressed until it wept its oil, and 1 drop, just 1, of her own healer's essence pressed from her fingertip with a deliberate and private tenderness, because the essence of a dawn-bound healer could only be given. It could not be harvested. It could not be demanded. And it could only be offered freely by someone who meant the offering. She had meant it. The blend would close the deep cut along Casimir's ribs, the one he'd taken from an enemy blade during the 3-day border battle, in a single night. Standard healing would take 2 weeks and leave him aching through the cold season. Her salve would leave no scar and no residual inflammation. It would work because it was made with care, not craft, because she had put something irreplaceable into it. She had not announced what she was doing. She had not asked for thanks in advance. She had done it quietly in the candle-lit hours after the celebration began downstairs. Because 2 nights ago, standing in the moonlit courtyard after a late sparring session she hadn't been part of but had watched from the upper walkway, he had reached across and tucked a loose strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Slowly, without urgency, without performance, as if the gesture was simply where his hand belonged. She had replayed it 19 times between that moment and now. She had built a small and careful world inside those 19 replays, a world where a man that iron-made and wind-carved chose to be gentle with her specifically, where the gentleness meant something he hadn't yet found the words for, where patience on both their parts was simply the beginning of something. She was 3 steps from the door when his voice reached her, which she performs adequately at the ceremonies. Casimir's voice was flat in a way she had never heard directed at her, stripped of every measured courtesy he extended in her presence. This was the voice behind closed doors, the voice of a man who required nothing. But do not let it confuse you, Aldrich. She is an acquisition. Her father's 80 sworn blades, his 4 river holds in the Ashvane lowlands, the dawn-bound bloodline locked in her veins. That is what I sealed the bond for. That is the entirety of what she is to me. The girl herself is beside the point. Seraphel did not move. A second voice rolled through the gap. Aldrich Ironvale, the Alpha's younger brother, lazy and unoffended. The voice of a man who has never once examined whether anything he believes is true. She looks at you like you fixed the stars in place. Casimir, let her look. No pause, no consideration. just the immediate, effortless economy of a man for whom the feelings of others are logistical conditions to be managed, not things to be cared about. A devoted mate is less complicated than a suspicious one. Once she anchors the territory lay and her father's warriors are sworn to the Dominion's rolls, I will have everything I contracted for. She can tend her frost gardens and feel treasured. No one loses anything. A third voice, rougher, younger, the voice of someone who had never been taught to lower it. Fenric Galeborn, one of Casimir's junior captains. She strikes me as the kind of woman who actually believes all of this is real. Casimir did not respond to that. He didn't need to. Outside the door, Seraphel Ashvane stood with the obsidian vessel warm against her palms and did not make a sound. The pain did not arrive like a storm. It arrived the way cold arrives in deep stone, not crashing, not dramatic, just settling, finding every hollow, every open space, every place she had deliberately left unguarded because she had believed, with the absolute clear-eyed conviction of a woman who had never been lied to by someone she loved, that those open spaces were being filled with something true. The strand of hair, the 19 replays, the frost moss bundle he had sent to her workroom 3 days after she mentioned it once, in passing, wrapped in oilcloth with no note. The way his thumb had remained on her wrist for 4 full seconds beyond what the bond ceremony required. She had measured it. She remembered it precisely. She understood all of it now, reassembled in its correct shape. Not love, not even the shadow of love. Management. The careful maintenance of a resource he needed to remain cooperative. Every gesture calibrated, every small warmth a calculation. She was a garden he had been watering just enough to keep producing. She looked down at the obsidian vessel. Her own essence was in it, given freely, because she had wanted him to heal, because she had wanted him to feel less pain, because she had loved him, or had loved the idea of him she had been building from curated moments and a single unhurried gesture in a moonlit courtyard, with the full, unguarded entirety of a woman who had never yet learned to love in smaller portions. She set the vessel down against the cold stone wall, quietly, no sound. When she straightened, with something behind her eyes went entirely still, not broken, not shattered, not the dramatic collapse of a woman undone, still, the way deep water goes still just before the surface freezes. Seraphel Ashvane turned and walked back into the dark of the corridor. She did not take the vessel with her. She left it against the wall, the salve, the drop of herself she could not take back, and every last illusion she had carried into this kingdom, exactly where they were. He wanted a transaction. He was going to learn what an Ashvane woman looked like when she stopped offering things for free. Chapter 2. The lowlands she came from. The Ashvane lowlands were not beautiful the way the packs of the Iron Veil Dominion use that word. They were not carved from ancient mountain granite. Or they had no fortress walls visible for 4 territories in every direction. No war banners wide enough to shadow an entire village at noon. They had no stone towers clawing at the sky to remind travelers of the power contained within. The Ashvane lowlands were beautiful the way a living thing is beautiful. Warm, breathing, imperfect in the specific ways that prove something is genuinely alive and not merely constructed to appear so. Rivers that ran pale silver in the moonlight, fed by glacial springs that never fully froze even in the hardest winters. Meadows thick with frost bloom, the pale gold and white flower that bloomed year-round only in the Ashvane soil, fed by the same quiet energy that ran beneath the valley in deep ley veins, as if the land itself were breathing in a slow, ancient rhythm. Woody healing gardens that smelled of moon-white root and cold sage, and something underneath both of those, something with no name that any wolf who entered those borders immediately recognized as safety, though none of them could have told you why. Aldevar Ashvane had governed these lands for 32 years. He was not young. The dark hair had gone silver at his temples, and the great scar that crossed his left forearm, a remnant of the contested Pass War, had long since settled into his skin like something that belonged there. He carried his authority the way men carry anything they have held long enough, without thinking about it, without performing it, with the simple, unshakable weight of something that has become part of the bone. He was also, beneath all of that, a father. And fathers who love their daughters carry a particular grief that no scar and no territory and no title ever fully quiets. Seraphel had her mother's eyes, dark, precise, the kind that observed everything and disclosed only a fraction of what they saw. She had her father's hands, broad-palmed, built for work, never idle. And she had, from the time she was 7 years old and first felt the pull of the lay beneath the valley floor, a gift that neither of her parents fully knew how to hold, the dawn-bound line. It was not a small inheritance. It was the reason packs from 5 territories sent messengers to the Ashvane gates when their lands began to thin. The reason warriors who should have died from battlefield wounds came home whole. And a dawn-bound healer could read the living energy of land the way a river reads its channel, not by thought, but by the deep instinct of being the right shape for the space. They could close wounds that standard healing could not touch. They could lay their hands on sick land and feel the ley lines beneath, those ancient veins of territorial energy that ran through the earth beneath every pack's home ground, and breathe life back into the places where the current had grown thin. Seraphel had been doing this since she was 15, quietly, without ceremony or announcement, because it was what she was for and because no one had ever given her the full language for what that actually meant about her worth. She understood she was valuable. She did not yet understand how to be the one who set the terms of that value. The envoy from the Iron Veil Dominion arrived on a gray morning in early autumn. 6 wolves in Casimir's colors, storm black and deep iron gray, riding through the Ashvane gates with the particular posture of men trained to project authority in every space they entered. Their standard bore the Iron Veil crest, a crescent moon locked inside a chain-link circle, silver on black. The mark of Casimir Ironveil, Alpha King, sovereign of the largest and most militarily consolidated territory in the known wolf world. Aldevar received them in his great hall. He dismissed Seraphel from the room before the formal reading began. She stood in the corridor outside. Her ear was not against the door. Her wolf's hearing did the rest. A bond union formally proposed. Casimir Ironveil, Alpha King of the Iron Veil Dominion, requests the daughter of Aldevar Ashvane as his bonded mate. In exchange, the Dominion will extend full military protection to the Ashvane lowlands for 3 generations, guaranteed free passage on all Dominion roads and river routes, formal recognition of the Ashvane lowlands as a protected partner territory under the Dominion's sovereign seal. She stood in the corridor and breathed. What they did not say aloud, what they did not need to, was the rest of it. Her father's 80 sworn warriors, among the finest blade-trained fighters in the lowland territories, the 4 river holds that controlled the western water access routes into the Dominion's interior, and the dawn-bound bloodline, the healing ability that the Iron Veil Dominion, with its spreading territory sickness and its quietly failing lay infrastructure, desperately, she urgently, silently needed. Her father signed. She understood why. She knew his mind the way she knew the Frostbloom's root system. Completely, in both directions. He could not give her a royal bloodline. He could not give her the kind of standing the high-born packs of the Dominion respected on sight, but he could give her a crown and a wider horizon and a future larger than the Ashvane Valley. He could give her a king. And he loved her enough to do it, even though the weight of it lived in every line of his face when she came to him that evening. "You do not have to pretend to be glad," she told him. Aldevar Ashvane looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he pulled her into an embrace so fierce it made her breath catch. The kind that a father gives a child when words have become completely inadequate and have never been adequate, and both of them know it. "Come back to me," he said into her hair. "Whatever that fortress does to you, Seraphel, whatever happens in those walls, come back to me." She understood he did not mean come home. He meant, wherever you are, do not lose yourself. He also called the pack's elder keeper, old Thessaly Mornvale, the Ashvane pack's keeper of ancient law and ceremonial record, to his study long after Seraphel was in bed. Thessaly was very old. Her face held more lines than a river holds bends. Her gray eyes held more knowledge than she ever willingly disclosed. She listened to her alpha speak. She said very little in return. Then she took up her quill and her oldest scroll, the one that smelled of dried sage and old moonlight, and she wrote into the bond compact in the precise binding language of Ashvane pack law, a set of clauses that no one from the Iron Veil Dominion's legal retinue would read carefully enough to notice. Aldevar was not sending his daughter into that fortress without armor. Seraphel did not know this yet. She spent the night before departure alone in the frost-bloom garden she had tended since childhood. The flowers opened around her in the dark, pale gold and silver white, reaching toward the quarter moon above as if they were following its specific instructions. She sat among them and tried to be honest with herself. She had seen Casimir Ironvale once, 3 seasons ago, at a great multi-territory summit. The kind where alphas from 6 packs converged in formal, watchful neutrality. She had been there as her father's healer representative, not expected to do more than stand correctly and say nothing memorable. Casimir had crossed the great summit hall on the second evening, moving through the assembled wolves with the unhurried certainty of a river moving through stone. Not forcing anything, not performing, just going, because it has always gone. He was tall, dark-haired, built from something older and colder than ordinary wolves, as though the mountain winter itself had decided to take a shape and walk around in it. He had not noticed her. She had not expected him to. She had not been able to forget him. "This is not wisdom," she told herself now in the garden. "You are going to a political bond. You are a resource they need. You know this. Go in with clear eyes." She breathed in the cold night air of the valley, but some quieter part of her offered. Perhaps he is also lonely. Perhaps a man who holds that much iron also carries more underneath it than he shows. Perhaps 2 people who do not yet know each other can learn to be something real. She was, against every practical instinct her father had ever cultivated in her, already halfway in love with the idea of him. Not him. She was honest enough to know she didn't know him. But the possibility, the space where something could grow if both of them tended it. She allowed herself that one night of possibility. At dawn, she left. The frost blooms were still open as she rode out. She tucked the small obsidian vessel, her mother's, worn smooth by years of use, into her traveling pack. In she had filled it with frost sage salve for the road. She would fill it with something else later. She did not look back at the gate. She was 23 years old, sharp as first frost and twice as careful, and she was walking into a kingdom with her whole heart open, because she had not yet learned that some doors are built to let things in, and very rarely to let them out. She would learn. Chapter 3. The Fortress at the Edge of the World. The Iron Veil Keep rose from the northern landscape the way a mountain rises, not built so much as always having been there, predating the concept of construction. It was ancient in the way that carries its own gravity. Black granite walls that had watched centuries of pack politics unfold beneath them, great iron gates engraved with the chain crescent mark of the Iron Veil line. It's a courtyard wide enough to run full war drills, and a great hall capable of hosting every named alpha in the territories, with room enough to conduct sidebar diplomacy on 3 sides, and cold. The air here had an edge that the soft, breathing warmth of the Ashvane Valley had never prepared her for. Seraphel arrived in the late afternoon, when the sky had gone the deep, bruised violet of approaching northern evening. The Iron Veil warriors who had escorted her from the border rode in flanking formation, silent, correct, giving nothing away. The gates opened without fanfare. The pack watched from the walls, from the courtyard, from the upper windows, with the particular quality of attention that an established pack gives to a newcomer they have already decided not to fully accept. She held her chin level. She met every gaze she could find. "You may have already decided what I am," she thought, without looking away from any of them. "I will not help you do it." Casimir received her in the great hall. He was standing, not seated on the great carved alpha's chair that commanded the far wall, not positioned behind any formal arrangement designed to remind her of the difference between their stations. Standing near the central fire, one hand resting easily on the back of a chair, as though he had no need to perform the architecture of his authority, the room already knew who held it. He didn't have to explain. He was wearing training leathers, not formal dress, which told her either that this was calculated informality, a choice to present himself as a man rather than a title, or that he simply had not believed her arrival required him to dress. She filed both possibilities. Then she kept walking. His eyes found her the moment she crossed the threshold, not searching, landing, the way a raptor lands, without drama, without urgency, simply with the certainty of something that always arrives where it means to. He extended his hand, palm up, the Iron Veil formal greeting. "Seraphel Ashvane." His voice was low and even, carrying the weight of a man who had been obeyed for a very long time. "You are welcome to the Iron Veil Dominion. Alpha King." She placed her hand in his and returned the greeting without flinching. "I am grateful for the welcome." Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly required by protocol. She was looking for something in his face, some flicker of anything that might answer the question she didn't yet know how to ask. She found him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Careful, assessing, not unkind. She told herself that was enough for now. In the weeks of formal courtship before the bond ceremony, she learned the shape of him. He was not expressive, but he was present. There was a difference, and she paid careful attention to it. He did not offer compliments easily. He did not reach for warmth as a conversational tool. But he appeared beside her in the mornings on the training grounds without being asked. He rode with her along the northern ridge paths when she requested to survey the territory's land health, and he did not speak over her observations. When she mentioned, only once, and in passing, that moon-white route was difficult to source this far north, she returned to her chambers 3 days later to find a fresh-wrapped bundle of it on her work table, bound in oilcloth without a note, and she held it for a long time before she put it away. Her handmaid, Petra, who had made the journey from the Ashvane lowlands with her, watched all of this from the correct distance. Petra was sharp-eyed and devoted and deeply, practically skeptical of everyone. She watched Casimir the way experienced wolves watch fires, with full respect for the warmth and full awareness of the burn. "He is careful with you, my lady," Petra said one morning, braiding Seraphel's hair with quick, practiced fingers. "But I want you to notice the difference between what a man gives because he chooses to and what a man gives because it costs him nothing." Seraphel was quiet. "What worries you?" she asked. Petra was quiet for a moment. "I see a man who manages you well. I do not yet see a man who has been undone by you. Those are not the same thing." Seraphel thought about this. She did not answer. She was not ready to agree. She was still watching. And then, 4 days later, everything Petra had said became harder to hold on to. It was late evening in the moonlit training yard, late enough that most of the keep had gone inside. Casimir was concluding a strategy review with 2 senior lieutenants. Seraphel had come outside to look at the stars, which sat lower and brighter here than in the valley, and had not stopped fascinating her. She was sitting on the stone edging at the yard's perimeter when he finished his review, dismissed the lieutenants, and walked over to where she sat. He did not say anything immediately. He stood beside her and looked at the same sky she was looking at. Then, without preamble and without explanation, he lifted one hand and tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear with a gentleness so complete and so unhurried that her chest went tight. His silver eyes met hers, briefly. Then he was looking at the sky again, easy, unbothered, as though the world had not just shifted its weight. She replayed that gesture 19 times in the hours that followed. She told herself it was real. She told herself he was a man who showed things slowly, without announcement, the way the best healers work, without drama, without performance. She built an entire future from one unhurried gesture in a moonlit yard. The bond ceremony came at the full moon. It was held in the open air of the great summit plateau behind the keep, a sweep of dark granite under a sky flooded with silver light. The entire pack gathered in the ceremonial circle, and the ancient binding words were spoken by the pack's elder chronicler, Oswin Greyvale, in the old tongue that Seraphel had studied from Thessaly's teachings and could follow well enough to understand completely. The bond flame burned between them, pale, nearly white, the sacred bonding fire that could only be called by an alpha pair in willing union. Casimir's silver eyes held hers through the full ceremony, and she thought she saw something in his face once, a flicker of something unguarded, something that lived below the iron discipline of a man who had been Alpha King since he was 26. She wanted to name it hope. She named it possibility. When he placed the pack mark on her wrist, the chain crescent pressed into her skin in the bond seal. His thumb rested over it for 4 full seconds longer than the ceremony required. She noticed. She would not forget. The morning after, he was already gone when she woke. A folded note on the pillow beside her, formal, courteous, written in his clean, controlled hand, informing her of his schedule and council duties, signed with his full name. She read it twice. She folded it and tucked it away in her traveling pack beside her mother's obsidian vessel. He is busy, she told herself. He is a king. She would be patient. She would learn the keep and make herself useful and let him come to water in his own time. She was almost certain she had seen something real. She was so convinced it was worth waiting for. Chapter 4. The corridor 1 month after the bond ceremony, Casimir's warriors drove back a rival pack's encroachment on the northern border. 3 days of hard fighting, 28 injured wolves. Now a territorial line successfully held against a pack that had been testing it for years. The victory celebration that filled the great hall that evening was the sound of a fortress that had earned its exhale. Deep, warm, expansive. The sound of people who have survived something pressing outward through stone walls. Seraphel had not gone to the feast immediately. She had spent the afternoon in her healing chamber because 7 injured wolves had come through her door before dinner, and she had worked steadily through all of them, closing the cuts still weeping, drawing the fever out of a shoulder that had begun to turn, sitting with a young warrior named Corvin, barely 19, too proud to ask for anything, not yet old enough to have learned he didn't have to earn care, until the shaking in his hands had finally gone still. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. When the last warrior left her chamber, the great hall below was in full celebration. She cleaned her work table methodically, the way she always did, and then her eye fell on the obsidian vessel. And she thought of Casimir's ribs. He had taken a blade cut deep along the right side during the first day's fighting. She had heard it from Aldrich's second-in-command when she had asked, casually during dinner 2 days ago. It had been treated with standard healing, which meant it was closed but not properly resolved. Standard treatment left residual inflammation. Standard treatment meant he would feel that wound through the entire cold season. Her salve could close it completely overnight. She had thought about offering before. She had held back. When navigating the careful line between being a mate and being an uninvited presence in a life that had not made much room for her yet. But it was late now. The celebration was winding down. She had the ingredients. And she found, sitting alone in her candlelit chamber, that she wanted to do this, not because a good mate would, not because it was politically useful, because she wanted him to be comfortable. The difference between those reasons felt important. She honored it. She ground the moon-white root by candlelight. She soaked the frost moss in the filtered water she kept by the window, and then she took the obsidian vessel and pressed one drop of her own essence into the blend. Slow, deliberate. A gift specific to her bloodline. Something that could not be purchased or requested, only freely given. She gave it freely. She warmed the vessel in her palms and walked down the corridor toward the great hall. She was 3 steps from the door when his voice reached her. She has learned to perform at the ceremonies adequately enough, flat, unbothered, the voice of a man who believes himself completely alone. But do not let sentiment cloud the analysis, Aldrich. She is an acquisition, her father's warriors, his 4 river holds, the dawn-bound bloodline locked in her blood. That is what I sealed the bond for. That is the entirety of what I contracted. The girl herself is beside the point. Aldrich's easy, unexamined reply, "She looks at you like you built the sky." Casimir, let her look. Immediate, effortless. The response of a man for whom the emotions of others are simply variables he has already accounted for. See, and a devoted mate is less complicated than a suspicious one. Once she anchors the territory lay and her father's warriors are sworn in, I will have everything I contracted for. She can tend her frost gardens and feel cherished. No one loses anything. Fenric Galeborn's rough, thoughtless voice. She seems like the type who actually believes all of this is real. Casimir did not respond. He didn't feel the need. Outside the door, Seraphel Ashvane stood with the obsidian vessel warm in her hands and understood, with complete and terrible clarity, what she had been building for 31 days, a monument to her own willingness to be deceived. Not by lies, exactly. He had never promised her love. He had simply performed the outline of it. Enough warmth to sustain cooperation, enough attentiveness to prevent suspicion. Knew every gesture calculated to keep her exactly where she was, open, devoted, grateful, and producing. The strand of hair, 19 replays, the moon-white root wrapped in oilcloth, 4 seconds of his thumb on her wrist. She saw it now, reassembled in its true shape. Not love, not even its shadow. Maintenance. The careful management of a resource that needed to remain willing. She was a ley line he had been drawing from without understanding that ley lines must be tended, not just used. She looked down at the obsidian vessel, her own essence in it, freely given, because she had wanted him to heal, because she had loved what she had believed he was, with the full, unguarded whole of a woman who had never yet been taught to love in smaller portions. She set the vessel down against the cold stone wall. No sound. When she straightened, something behind her eyes went entirely still, not shattered, not in pieces, still. The way deep water goes still just before the surface seals into ice. Seraphel Ashvane turned around. She walked back into the dark. She left the vessel where it was. By the time she reached her chambers, the tears had come. Silent and thorough, the kind that do not ask permission. She did not try to stop them. She sat at the edge of the bed and let them run their full course because she had been raised in a home that taught her never to swallow a grief that needed to move through you. You let it move, you let it finish, then you breathe. She breathed. She thought of her father. Aldavar Ashvane had built something lasting from land that the rest of the wolf world had always treated as secondary. Not because the world had given him an easy foundation. It hadn't, but because he understood with absolute clarity the value of what he held, and he had never once allowed anyone else to set that value for him. He also had never made a bad investment twice. Seraphel sat in the dark of her chambers for a long time. Her hands were still faintly warm from the vessel she had left in the corridor, and when the tears finished, all the way down to the bottom, she felt something else take their place. Not rage. Rage is hot and imprecise and useful, mainly for burning things down. This was colder, cleaner, more like a decision. She had walked into this kingdom with everything open: her heart, her gifts, her healing, her hours. A drop of herself stirred into warm salve by candlelight, given because she had believed she was loved. She had believed she was seen. She was not seen. She was useful. She understood the difference now. She would not forget it. He wanted a dawn-bound healer and a warrior's dowry. He had assumed she would go on giving both willingly and without conditions, because devotion had blinded her. She was done being blind. She rose from the bed. She smoothed her dress. She crossed to the small writing desk by the window and sat down with a fresh sheet of parchment and her quill. She did not write anything yet. She sat very still in the quiet of the room, listening to the distant sounds of the celebration winding down in the hall below. Then, carefully and with full intention, she began to think, not about grief, about leverage. Chapter 5. The Renegotiation. She did not come to breakfast the next morning with swollen eyes. On she came in her formal Ashvane healer silks, the deep ink blue with the gold crescent stitched at the collar that marked her bloodline's full status. Not the softer colors she'd been wearing for 31 days, the warmer, easier tones that did not challenge the Dominion's preference for its alpha mates to present as ornamental. The ink blue was austere and precise, and said to anyone who knew how to read it that the woman wearing it was not here for your approval. She was here on her own business. She sat at the morning council table. She did not pour Casimir's tea. She had done it every morning for 31 days, quietly, naturally, as part of the gentle rhythms she had established. Small acts of care woven into the routine, taken for granted by the third week because devoted mates do not announce their devotion. And they sustain it invisibly, and the invisibility is the point. Today, the tea sat in its pot. A lieutenant eventually reached across and poured his own. Casimir's silver eyes found her across the table. He said nothing. He watched. She addressed the council directly. Before we begin the morning session, I would like a formal reading of the Bond Compact's dawn-bound provisions. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when someone has said something no one expected. Aldrich Ironvale set down his cup. Fenric Galeborn studied his hands. Two senior lieutenants exchanged a glance so brief it might have been imagined. Casimir's jaw was still, but his eyes had sharpened in a way she recognized, the way he looked when a border situation had just changed shape without warning. The compact was fetched. Or Elder Oswin Greyvale read the provisions aloud, carefully, methodically, committed to accuracy as he always was. He read every clause, and when he reached the one that Thessaly Mornvale had inscribed in Ashvane Pack law-binding language before any of them had been paying attention, he paused for precisely half a breath. No dawn-bound healer of the Ashvane bloodline may be compelled, expected, or assumed by bond obligation or dominion custom to activate healing, territory lay anchoring, or any gift of the bloodline without their willing, freely given consent, offered under an open moon and formally acknowledged in signed pack record by the receiving party. Oswin looked up. He folded the compact with both hands. The silence that followed was extraordinary. The Casimir Ironvale had not been blindsided in a council session in 18 years as Alpha King. She watched him understand, in real time, with nothing available to hide behind, that he had been operating for 32 days on an assumption that no law he could enforce supported. He had believed the bond ceremony sealed the transaction. Warriors, riverholds, one devoted dawn-bound healer, delivered, cooperative, producing. He had believed devotion was a mechanism he had successfully engaged. The devotion was gone, and without it, the mechanism had no teeth. He looked at her. She met his gaze with the flat, quiet steadiness she had spent a sleepless night assembling. "The dawn-bound provisions are binding," she said, simply. "I would like them formally acknowledged by this council in writing before any future healing request is processed." "You are my bonded mate," Casimir said. His voice was level, controlled, but something had moved underneath it that she hadn't heard before. "Not a contract partner presenting terms. A bonded mate's gifts are her own, Alpha King. That is not my opinion. It is pack law. Elder Thessaly Mornvale inscribed it. Elder Greyvale just read it." She held his gaze. "I am not renegotiating the bond. I am simply reading what was already written." Aldrich opened his mouth. Casimir silenced him with one hand flat on the table. The council session went on. The tea in the pot went cold. Afterward, she spent 2 hours with the keep's chief physician, Navid Coldstream, a quiet, methodical wolf she had come to genuinely respect. Then she explained carefully what the new dawn-bound healer process would look like. All treatment requests would be logged in a formal healer record. Her consent would be noted in writing for each session. The pack would acknowledge her role as the source of treatment, not as a benefit of the bond union, but as a service provided by the dawn-bound healer. "This is not a refusal to heal," she told Navid directly. "I will not leave a wolf to suffer unnecessarily, but my gifts are mine. I am ensuring the record reflects that." Navid nodded slowly. "I understand, Lady Ashvane." "Sovereign Healer Ashvane," she said gently, without heat. "If you please." He wrote it down. Casimir came to her healing chamber that evening. He did not storm. He did not slam anything because he was a king. And kings move through spaces as if every room already belongs to them, which is both a power and a blindness that she was only now beginning to understand the full shape of. He crossed the chamber and stood at the edge of her work table, and he was very controlled and very furious and trying to be only the first of those two things. "What are you doing, Seraphel?" Not a question, a demand wearing a question's shape. She did not stop what she was doing. She was preparing a cooling compress for one of the warriors whose fever had returned overnight, and the work required a rhythm that benefited from not being interrupted. "Exactly what I said this morning, following the law that governs my bloodline. You have been healing Dominion warriors for 31 days without issue. You chose today to turn this political." She looked up. One, her dark eyes were steady, which was, she noted from the slight shift in his posture, somewhat more unsettling to him than raised voices would have been. "I chose today because today I understand what I did not understand 31 days ago." She held his gaze. "I was healing this pack out of love, and love that is taken for granted becomes something else. You use the word irrelevant. I am simply agreeing with you. My gifts, however, are not. You know that now. I believe you have always known it. The difference is that now so do I." She looked back down at the compress. He stood at the edge of her work table for a long moment. The silence was not comfortable, but it was honest. The honesty of a room where something has finally been said that neither person can pretend they didn't hear. Then he left. The door closed. She allowed herself exactly 12 seconds of closed eyes and careful breathing. Then she went back to work. Chapter 6. The Eastern Alpha. It was 2 weeks after the council session when Seraphel attended an interterritorial summit gathering, a formal diplomatic convening at a neutral hall 2 hours east of the keep, the kind that occurred 3 times per season during summit months. She attended as Casimir's bonded mate. She sat beside him in the formal sessions. She sat beside Petra during the evening reception, which was her preference, and which Casimir had stopped raising objections to. In the third hour of the reception, a wolf crossed the room toward her with the purposeful directness of someone who has decided exactly where they are going. He was tall, broad-shouldered, while wearing the deep green and amber colors of the Eastern Vale territories, with dark gold eyes that were warm without being soft. He inclined his head, not the stiff formality of a packbow, but a genuine courtesy. Sovereign Healer Ashvane, he smiled, open, unhurried. I have been hoping to speak with you since the second session this afternoon. I am Dorian Valistern, Alpha of the Eastern Vale, and I have been told remarkable things about the dawn-bound line. I find I would much rather hear them from the source. She looked at him. He met her gaze steadily. Without the assessing quality she had learned to recognize in the eyes of wolves who were measuring her value before deciding whether to address her, he was treating her as if she were the most interesting person in the room. That had not happened in 31 days. "Well, Alpha Valistern," she said, "I have time." Across the reception hall, Casimir looked up from his conversation. He watched them for a moment. Then he looked away. He told himself it was of no consequence. He was wrong. The summit season brought 3 major territory gatherings before the Grand Summit, and Dorian Valistern attended every one. He rode beside Seraphel during the morning territorial surveys when the assembled alphas took the courtesy exercise of reviewing the hosting pack's borders. He sat across from her during the formal reading sessions, and unlike the majority of attending wolves who treated readings as cover for sidebar negotiations, he actually listened and had thoughtful, specific things to say afterward. He laughed easily and genuinely, without politics in it, or when she found herself laughing in return in a way she had entirely forgotten how to do inside the Iron Veil Keep. He asked about the dawn-bound line without the transactional edge that the question always carried from anyone inside the Dominion. He asked about the work itself, what it felt like to read a ley line's health from beneath, whether the land had something like a pulse, how the ancient dawn-bound healers had first documented the anchor bonds centuries ago. He was curious for its own sake. She answered freely. And in answering, she found herself thinking more carefully about her own work than she had been encouraged to think about it in weeks. Casimir noticed. She was aware of precisely when he began to notice, because his behavior changed in specific, readable ways. He positioned himself closest to her during the morning patrol rides, not speaking to her, just present. The way a wolf places its body between something it considers its own and something it hasn't yet decided how to categorize. He found reasons in the reading sessions to redirect conversations that placed him physically at her left. He stopped leaving the evening receptions as soon as his minimum diplomatic obligation was discharged, and instead stayed in the room, watching. His wolf was not philosophical about Dorian Valistern. One evening in the corridor outside the third summit reception, Casimir caught up to her as she was leaving. "The Eastern Vale Alpha finds you remarkably fascinating," he said. His voice was very controlled. His jaw was tight. She looked at him. "He treats what I think as if it has value. It is a novel experience." She walked past him. She heard behind her a slow, exhaled breath. She did not turn around. Chapter 7. The Architecture of Justice. What Casimir could not see, what she had been building for 2 full months in careful, methodical silence, was not a courtship with Dorian Valistern. It was a legal framework. She had spent her evenings during the summit season with the lay keepers. The keepers were an institution older than any existing pack. They existed outside of pack politics, the way rivers exist outside of property lines, present, essential, and belonging only to themselves. They were the oldest institutional memory of Wolfkind, and they guarded the documentation of the ley lines running beneath every major territory in the known world with a rigor that made even Thessaly Mornvale's archive look casual. Seraphel had written to them in her 3rd week in the Dominion, quietly, from her healing chamber, in the specific formal register of lay correspondence that would not have been recognizable as anything significant to anyone who happened to notice the paper. She had written because, during her first survey walk of the Iron Veil territory, she had placed her hands on the northern land and felt something that concerned her deeply. The land was not dying, but it was thin. The way a fire goes thin when the air it needs has begun to run short. The keepers sent their chief scholar, an ancient wolf named Lorith Dawnvale, with the only one of their number who ever left the archive, to meet her at the second summit gathering. They spoke for 4 hours in the library of the hosting hall. The door was closed. The conversation was conducted in the formal register of lay law that none of Casimir's advisors would have been able to follow, even if they had pressed their ears to the wood. What Lorith told her was this: the ley line running beneath the Iron Veil Keep, the deep, ancient vein of territorial energy that fed the Dominion's land health and sustained its foundational strength, had been deteriorating for 3 generations. The previous Alpha Kings had managed it with temporary measures, none of which addressed the root cause. The root cause was documented. It had been documented for 200 years in the Keeper archives. Well, this particular ley line required permanent anchoring by a dawn-bound healer. Without that anchor, the deterioration was inevitable, gradual but inevitable. The territory sickness spreading outward from the Dominion's interior was not a border problem. It was not a rival pax working. It was the land itself, slowly running out of what it needed. Only a dawn-bound healer could give it what it needed, and Seraphel had not done so. She had felt the ley pulling at her faintly, like a tide she was declining to follow, since her first week in the Dominion. She had held back, not out of strategy, not yet, but out of instinct. Her instincts, she was discovering, had been wiser than her heart. She stayed quiet about the ley line. She asked Lorith instead to draft the anchor clause, a provision to be inscribed into sovereign pack law or under the full authority of the Keeper archives, stating that the ley anchor bond belongs to the healer who creates it, not to the crown of the territory it sustains. The bond is personal, not political. It cannot be claimed, seized, or transferred. If the healer chooses to withdraw, the anchor withdraws with her. Lorith looked at her over the stacked scrolls with very old, very clear eyes. "You understand what this means?" he said quietly. "I do. Once inscribed, no Alpha King can override it." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father chose carefully." She was quiet for a moment, too. He would say carefully and well are the same thing. Lorith began to write. The multi-pack accord moved in parallel, slower, more visible, occupying Casimir's attention as something he could watch and miscalculate as a romantic complication. Dorian Valstern was a willing and capable partner. He had his own reasons for wanting the dawn-bound line to hold protected sovereign status across the Dominion. He had 2 dawn-bound healers in the Eastern Vale whose gifts had been subjected to Dominion claims during previous border negotiations. The accord would protect them as well. "This is the most elegant piece of legal architecture I have encountered in a decade," he told her one afternoon, reviewing the latest draft in the Summit Library. "Your father's people trained you well." "My father's people trained me to understand the value of what I carry," she said. "I am applying the lessons somewhat later than I should have." Dorian looked at her with those open, warm eyes. "Oh, for what it is worth, I see what he failed to." "That is not strategy," said Seraphel. "No," he agreed. "It is simply the truth." She appreciated that he did not dress it up. What she did not tell Dorian, what she did not tell anyone, was that Casimir had started appearing at her frost garden in the mornings. Not every morning, not announced. Just sometimes, before council sessions, he would be standing at the garden's edge in the early light, not asking anything, not performing anything, just there in the way that a man stands when he doesn't entirely know why he has gone somewhere but cannot make himself leave. He asked about the moon-white route one morning. A genuine question, not transactional. She answered him. He nodded and was quiet. He came back the next morning. She did not soften. But she filed it in a private place she was not ready to examine. One evening in the library, Seraphel reviewing Keeper scrolls by lamplight, Casimir seated across the table with his own reading, a situation that had developed over several weeks without ever being officially established. He looked up from the table. "You used to bring things," he said quietly. "Small things. You stopped." She did not look up from her scroll. "You told Aldrich I was beside the point. I am simply agreeing with you." The silence that followed lasted a long time. She read 3 full paragraphs of lay documentation. She retained none of them. When she looked up, he was still watching her. His silver eyes held something she could not name, which meant it was something she had not seen on him before. She looked back down. That night, in her chambers, and she took the obsidian vessel from the shelf where she had placed it on arrival. She held it in her palms for a moment. It was empty. She had not refilled it. She set it back. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily. Chapter 8, Under the Open Moon. The Grand Alpha Summit convened at the season's full moon. It was held in the Great Hall of the Neutral Grounds, the ancient site at the center of 4 major territories that no pack claimed and all packs acknowledged. Walls of stone older than any existing alpha line. A roof open at its center so that every wolf assembled beneath it stood under the same moon. No home advantage, no hierarchy of sky. Every alpha and elder from the known pack world attended. Casimir entered with Seraphel at his left, the formal bonded mate position, and the assembled packs watched with the particular attention reserved for situations where something has been quietly building for months, and everyone present can feel it even if no one has been able to name it. Word had traveled the way pack world word always travels, in fragments with embellishment and with the persistent accuracy that hearsay develops when the underlying truth is too significant to be entirely distorted, that the Dominion's healer mate had gone quiet in ways that were not peaceful, that the Alpha King had lost his easy confidence in the resources he had marked, that something had shifted inside the Iron Veil Keep that could not be fully explained from the outside. Seraphel wore ink blue. The gold crescent at her collar caught the moonlight and held it. She sat beside Casimir through the morning session, formal, appropriate, present, contributing when addressed. She showed nothing on her face that could be read as anything other than composed attention. In the afternoon recess, she met briefly with Dorian Valstern across the hall with his Eastern Vale delegation. They did not speak for long. He handed her a folded document. She read it, folded it, tucked it into the interior pocket of her formal robe. She returned to her seat. The afternoon session opened. The agenda listed as its 4th item a matter of sovereign healer recognition, submitted by the Eastern Vale delegation, co-signed by 7 elder packs, documented under the full authority of the Keeper archives. Casimir, seated beside her, saw it on the agenda. Not his jaw tightened by the smallest fraction. She felt his stillness. She said nothing. When the summit facilitator reached item 4, Seraphel rose. She had spoken in formal council before, in her father's hall, at smaller gatherings, in the teaching sessions Thessaly Mornvale had run for years. She knew the particular quality of silence that falls over an assembled body when the person speaking is saying something that reorganizes the room. She had been on the listening side of that silence before. Now she was on the other side. I address this summit as sovereign healer of the dawn-bound Ashvane line. Her voice was clear, unhurried, recognized under the Keeper Archive's formal documentation and the multi-pack accord now ratified by 7 elder territories and co-sponsored by the Eastern Vale. She let that settle for 3 seconds. The Iron Veil Dominion is experiencing territory sickness. This is known. What is not fully known outside of the Keeper archives and this hall is the nature of its source. She explained the ley line, clearly without unnecessary complexity. She explained what a dawn-bound anchor meant, what its absence meant, what the Keeper archives showed about the Dominion's foundational ley line's current state. She explained the anchor clause, inscribed in Keeper law, establishing that the ley bond belongs to its healer and cannot be claimed by any crown. She explained that she had not yet placed the anchor. The room was very, very still. The Iron Veil Dominion's continued territorial strength depends on a willing gift from a dawn-bound healer. That gift cannot be forced, demanded, purchased, or assumed under any existing pack law. The Sovereign Healer Accord this summit is now ratifying establishes across all signatory territories that no alpha may claim, control, or coerce a dawn-bound healer's gifts by virtue of bond, treaty, or territorial custom. She looked at Casimir. He was looking at her. His silver eyes held something she had never seen on his face in all the weeks she had spent trying to read it. Not anger, not calculation. The specific, devastating recognition of a man who has understood, all at once, all the way to the bottom, the exact shape of what he has lost and precisely when he lost it. She held his gaze for one clean breath. Then she turned back to the assembled summit. I offer this not as a threat. The Dominion's land will not be allowed to fail. The wolves who live and work and bleed on that land have done nothing to deserve that consequence, but they deserve a sovereign who understands the value of what sustains them, and a healer who understands the value of what she gives. She sat. The facilitator called for ratification. The 7 co-signing elder packs confirmed in order. The accord passed. Into the silence that followed, Seraphel turned to Casimir, not leaning toward him, but close enough that her voice reached him alone, private in the center of 300 assembled wolves. I am just a dowry, Alpha King, she said quietly, and a dowry is an investment. I am simply ensuring I hold the controlling interest. His own words. Spoken to Aldrich in the firelit hall, the night he had believed no one else was within range of anything he said. His face did not hold its composure, not fully, not in front of everyone assembled. For one visible, undeniable moment, Casimir Ironveil, Alpha King of the Iron Veil Dominion, the most feared wolf in the known territories, looked like a man who has just discovered the full cost of something he had been entirely certain he was paying nothing for. Dorian Valstern rose next. He addressed the summit briefly. I want the record to be clear, he said, with the directness she had come to appreciate, that my relationship with Sovereign Healer Ashvane has been, from the first moment to the last, a strategic alliance toward the ratification of the accord we have just passed. I was not courting the Alpha King's mate. Something like open admiration moved through his voice. Though I was watching her build the legal architecture to protect her own people, I was honored to assist. He sat. The hall exhaled. Seraphel gathered her folios, unhurried, exact. She rose. She looked once across the hall to where her father sat in the elder section, Aldavar Ashvane, silver-templed, scarred, 80 warriors at his word and 4 riverholds at his back, watching his daughter with the expression of a man who has just seen the person he loves do something so completely and wholly themselves that the pride of it has no more room to go. She held his gaze for a breath. Then she turned forward and walked toward the great hall's door. She heard behind her the sound of Casimir rising. He crossed the hall quickly. He caught her in the wide stone corridor beyond the doors, out of the direct sight line of the assembled summit, but not far enough to be invisible to anyone who looked. He stood in front of her. He was not performing anything. He was not managing anything. He was a king who had misplaced every instrument of kingship somewhere in the last 100 days and had arrived, finally, at the raw and uncomfortable place where there is nothing left but honesty. "What does this mean?" he said, not demanding, asking. She looked at him, and for one moment, just half a breath, something in her chest moved, the old warmth, not gone, buried deep under 60 days of necessary, careful distance. It moved the way something that has been very still moves when it hears a sound it recognizes. She closed it again. "You designed this marriage as a transaction, Casimir," she said. "As a businesswoman, I must advise you, I do not renegotiate closed contracts." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she walked away. She did not look back. She could feel, between her shoulder blades, the weight of his eyes following her all the way to the end of the corridor. The weight of a man who has finally, completely, and much too late, begun to see. Chapter 9. The Return. She returned to the Iron Veil Keep. That surprised people. The assembled packs had assumed what assembled packs always assume when a dramatic recalibration has occurred, that she would leave. Return to the Ashvane lowlands. Withdraw. Write a chapter ending. She did not. She returned because the land needed her, and because her healing work did not make exceptions for personal complications, and because, though she said this to no one, not even Petra, running would have given the story an ending it had not yet earned. But everything inside the keep was different. Not overnight, not all at once. Different the way a room is different when the quality of light has shifted. The same walls, the same stone, but the attention on them changed. The pack moved around her differently. Before, she had been the Alpha King's lowland mate, tolerated, assessed, managed. Now she was the sovereign healer of the Dawnbound line, recognized by Summit Accord and Keeper Law, holding in her living hands the continued health of every warrior's land beneath their feet. They came to her healing chamber differently, not with entitlement, with the specific, genuine respect of people who understand that what they are receiving is being given by choice. She noticed the difference. She preferred it. Navid Coldstream, the Keep's chief physician, worked with her more openly than before. He asked her questions about lay health indicators. He shared his own observations about the territory's sickness's progression. He treated her as the authority she was, rather than the accessory he had been instructed to accommodate. She found she genuinely liked him. She credited his observations by name in her Keeper correspondence. Petra, helping her dress one morning with her characteristic brisk efficiency, said, without preamble, "He brought a frost bloom." Seraphel paused. "What?" "Outside your door, before dawn this morning. A clay pot with one frost bloom in it. No note. I nearly stepped on it." A silence. "Did you bring it inside?" "I set it on the windowsill," Petra said, "where it would get light." A pause. "My lady, he looks at you the way you used to look at him." Seraphel stood at the window for a moment, looking at the small clay pot and the pale gold flower opening toward the morning. Its petals were the exact shade of the blooms she had left behind in the Ashvane Valley. She did not know where he had sourced it this far north in the cold season. "I know," she said finally, "and that is the cruelest part." Petra said nothing more. She finished the braid, pinned it, laid Seraphel's formal silks over the chair, and left the room without another word, which was, Seraphel recognized, one of the many reasons she depended on Petra for considerably more than fastenings. Casimir did not make dramatic gestures. That had never been his shape. What he did was smaller, more consistent. Women somehow more difficult to dismiss than dramatic gestures would have been. He appeared at the Frost Garden every morning, not asking for treatment, not requesting access, just present, standing at the edge in the early light, sometimes asking a careful question, sometimes silent, sometimes simply there in the way that he used to never be. He sourced keeper texts she hadn't been able to locate and set them on her work table without ceremony. He cleared a blocked channel in the Healing Garden's irrigation network, which she had noticed only after it was done, and which required either someone informing him of it or him paying close enough attention to observe it himself. She could not determine which. Either answer was difficult in its own way. One afternoon she found him in the library, alone, reading. She came in. He did not look up, and she did not announce herself. She settled at the far table with her own work. They were quiet together for 2 hours, which was comfortable in a way that did not benefit from being examined too closely. When she rose to leave, he said her name, just her name, not her title, in a low voice the way he had said it in the corridor outside the summit hall. She paused in the doorway. "I know that words do not repair things," he said, "and I know I do not get to say I was wrong and expect it to mean more than what it is, but I want you to understand something. I see you now. I see what you are. I see what I was given and what I failed to recognize, and I am telling you plainly, without any strategy behind it, that I see you." She stood in the doorway for a long moment. "I know you do, Casimir." She held his gaze. "That is the beginning of something. It is not yet enough to be the end of something else." She left the doorway. She went to the frost garden. Chapter 10. The Anchor. That night she walked alone to the ley line's anchor point. It was accessible through a stairway beneath the keep's oldest foundation level, the kind of place that architecture forgets about over centuries, that exists only in ancient blueprints and the institutional memory of certain elders. The keepers had given her the access notation in their first correspondence. She had been carrying it since. She descended the stair and sat on the ancient stone at the line's center and pressed her hands flat against the earth. The ley was faint, not gone, far from gone, but thin. The way it had felt on that first survey walk, and when she had placed her hands on the northern land and felt something pulling at her gently, like a tide she was not yet following. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the corridor, the obsidian vessel set down against the cold stone wall, the drop of herself she had stirred into warm salve by candlelight, given because she had believed she was loved. She thought about her father's voice. "Come back to me," not "come home." He had known she might not. He had meant, wherever you are, do not lose yourself. She thought about the frost bloom on the windowsill, about a man who had never tried before, trying badly, imperfectly, without the customary skill that confidence provides. Because skill requires confidence, and he had lost the confidence to be managed about this. She was not ready to call it love, and she did not know that she would ever be. Not in the form she had believed in during those 30 days before the corridor. But she thought about the land beneath her hands, the wolves whose health depended on it. Young Corvin, with his 2 proud eyes and his trembling hands, who had nothing to do with his king's choices and everything to do with this land's continued breath. She thought about what she was, not a dowry, not a resource, not a mechanism someone had engaged, or a gift someone had assumed. A healer. The last of an unbroken line of women who had always, in the end, known that the land needed what it needed, and that the choice to give it was theirs to make. She made it. Not for him. She made it because she was Seraphel Ashvane, daughter of Aldavar, sovereign healer of the Dawnbound line, and the land was asking her. And she was the only one who could answer. Her hands pressed deeper into the stone. The ley responded. Not in a rush, not the dramatic roar of something restored all at once. The way a root answers soil, quietly, firmly, without drama. It caught. It held. The thread of connection took. The anchor bond she had not placed in 60 days placed itself now, freely, entirely on her own terms. She felt it move outward beneath the keep, running toward the borders, toward the places where the sickness had been creeping at the edges, slow and patient, as the damage had been slow and patient. She exhaled. When she emerged from the foundation stair and walked back through the keep's main corridor, it was late. The halls were quiet. Most of the pack had gone to their chambers. Casimir was in the frost garden, and she saw him from the corridor entrance before he saw her, sitting on the low stone wall at the garden's edge, not performing anything, not managing anything, just sitting in the dark with his shoulders not quite straight, looking at the pale frost blooms that opened even at this hour toward whatever fraction of moon was available. He looked like a man who had sat down because he did not know where else to go. She walked into the garden. He looked up when he heard her steps. He did not rise, which surprised her. He just looked at her the way he had looked at her in the summit corridor, unguarded, undefended, a king without his kingdom's armor. She sat beside him on the stone wall, not close, not touching, just beside, in the particular distance of two people who are figuring out whether the space between them is a gap to be crossed or a border to be respected. He did not speak immediately. She did not require him to. The garden was quiet around them. The frost blooms opened toward the sky. Somewhere beneath the keep's foundation, the lay was moving again, the faint hum of it reaching outward through the earth after 2 months of waiting. "The land is breathing," he said, quietly, finally. "Yes," she said. A long silence, not uncomfortable. The particular silence of a garden at night when the only sound is growing things. Why? Just that, one word. The real question behind it was longer, and he knew she understood it. Because it was the right time, she said, and because the land did not do anything wrong. He received that without argument. That was one of the few things she had come to quietly appreciate about him. He did not argue with truths he recognized. "And us?" he said. She considered it. She looked at the frost blooms. She thought about the 19 replays and the corridor and the obsidian vessel she had refilled that morning for the first time in 2 months. Not with healing salve. With a new blend she was developing for the Border Patrol wolves who trained in the cold. Her own work. For herself. "I don't know yet," she said. And it was the truest thing she had said to him in months. Not closed, not open, not performing anything in either direction. Simply, honestly, where she was. "That is more than I deserve," he said quietly. She did not tell him he was wrong. And she did not tell him he was right. They sat together in the frost garden as the night moved around them, not touching, not resolving, not yet anywhere near the end of what had been broken or the beginning of what might be built. Just 2 wolves on a stone wall in the dark, one of them finally beginning to understand her own worth, the other finally beginning to understand what that had always meant. The lay hummed beneath the earth. The land was breathing. The frost blooms were open. And Seraphel Ashvane, who had entered this fortress with everything freely given and had nearly lost herself in the giving, held her own hands in her own lap and felt the warmth of the anchor she had placed in the earth below, and understood with perfect clarity that whatever came next would come on her own terms, not because she had won, because she had. Finally, and without apology, learned her own worth. Epilogue. What this story is about. And that, in the end, is not a story about a king. It is a story about a woman who discovered that the most powerful thing she carried was not her bloodline, not her gifts, not the ley line or the 80 warriors or the 4 river holds. Her father had built his life around. It was the decision about when to give them, and she would never again make that decision for anyone except herself. The tragedy of the Alpha King of the Iron Veil Dominion was not that he nearly lost his kingdom. It was that he nearly lost the woman who would have gladly given him the whole world, and only understood her value the moment she chose to keep it. Soft instrumental music fades back in. That was She's Just a Dowry to Me, the alpha said, unaware she was listening. An original story from Kismet Romance Collection. If this story moved you, if Seraphel's quiet, unshakable reclamation of herself hit the way it was meant to hit, please leave a comment below and tell me which moment got you the most. Was it the corridor? The council session? The frost garden at the end? I want to know. And if you are not yet subscribed to Kismet Romance Collection, what are you doing? Subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Because we have more stories coming. Stories about women who are underestimated, about love that has to be earned, about the moment someone finally chooses themselves. Stories like this one. I will see you in the next one.